Tonight's debate will have 6 discussion sections: America's role in the world, Afghanistan and Pakistan, Israel and Iran; 2 sections on the changing Middle East and the new face of terrorism, and the rise of China and tomorrow's world. According to moderator Bob Schieffer, a lot of time will be spent on the Arab uprising and their aftermath, particularly, as you know, the deadly attack and the U.S. consulate in Libya is expected to be a hot topic. It's an area the Romney campaign certainly believes President Obama is most vulnerable when it comes to his foreign policy record, but Governor Romney stumbled on that very issue in last week's debate.
You said in the Rose Garden, the day after the attack, it was an act of terror. It was not a spontaneous demonstration. Is that what you're saying?
Please proceed.
I want to make sure we get that for the record, because it took the president 14 days before he called the attack in Benghazi an act of terror.
Get the transcript.
He did, in fact, sir. So let me call it an act of terror.
Can you say that a little louder, Candy?
He did call it an act of terror. It did as well take 2 weeks or so for the whole idea of there being a riot out there about this tape to come out. You're correct about that.
So joining me now, former State Department Egypt officer Joel Rubin and Newsweek columnist, Daily Beast contributor Zachary Karabell. Joel, I'll start off with you. Obviously, we don't expect the conversation to go the way it did in last week's debate, but Libya is on the agenda. The president, most recently on the Daily Show with Jon Stewart, admitted mistakes were made. We now know more information about the intelligence and when it was coming in and when it was getting to the White House. But no doubt there is still an issue here over what mistakes were made and why the administration seemed to have stuck for so long on the story that this was a protest against the film, and factoring in, and of course, Joel, the new details regarding the CIA.
Thank you, Tamara. You're right. This story is certainly going to come up tonight. And tonight's debate really is the commander-in-chief test. Does Mitt Romney, does the president, do they have an understanding of the issues and the demeanor to lead? And on the Libya issue, I think it's going to be a stark contrast. The data that the administration has been putting out has been reflective of what the intelligence community itself has provided to them. I find it odd that right now Republicans are criticizing General David Petraeus and the CIA for its assessments of what happened on the ground in Libya. He's a real American hero, and the administration has tried to do its best to reflect that. It has investigations underway. It certainly is not hiding anything. If anything, this demonstrates how complicated foreign affairs is. So tonight, an understanding of that complexity needs to be demonstrated by the 2 candidates for Americans to have confidence in the next commander-in-chief.
Well, Joel, you say the administration is not hiding anything. Obviously, at least according to one report, Romney advisors, through their research, have found that a lot of voters in Ohio and Pennsylvania in particular believe that there is not the transparency that is needed, and they have questions of whether or not the administration is hiding anything. What do you feel is a legitimate question to be posed to the president tonight regarding what happened in Libya?
I think it's a very legitimate question to ask what the arrangements are for securing our facilities and advancing our interests in the Middle East. It's a changing, dynamic region, and we need to have a clear plan forward for that. But the documents that were provided, for example, to the House Oversight Committee by the State Department that were dumped online essentially last week on Friday were a treasure trove of information provided in many ways to clarify what it is that the United States knows. That kind of information has been shared publicly. The administration has been out publicly talking about this. Questions about consistency are legitimate ones to ask, but this is the fog of war that we're talking about. And in the early days, we need to remember that many Republican commentators, Richard Armitage, former Deputy Secretary of State, and others said that the fog of war makes it very messy, and that's certainly why there was confusion in the initial response.
Zachary, let me bring you in. You've written extensively on China, and we talked about this going into the break. Governor Romney, in an ad that came out not terribly long ago, said on his first day he would declare China currency manipulators. Clinton did that. Bush did it as well. What is the impact of something like that? Is that, again, another example of tough talk, something that sounds good, but what does it result?
Yeah, I mean, in that sense, it's linked to the Romney and the Republican line about Libya, which is, I'm going to be stronger as the chief executive and as the commander-in-chief than the current chief executive and the commander-in-chief. So when you say, I'm going to label this country, this China, a currency manipulator on day one, it sounds very tough, right? Big action. What's odd about this whole charade is that you label a country a currency manipulator and absolutely nothing happens. There's no legal effect. It's not like tariffs go up. It's not as if imports suddenly become more expensive. It's not as if
there's no bite behind the bar.
There's no bite whatsoever. In fact, weirdly enough, the only thing that happens is you're supposed to then enter into negotiations with the country that you label the currency manipulator about their currency valuation. A, we're already doing that with China, and B, it sounds like that's something that Romney won't want to do. What's interesting, though, is while it has absolutely zero legal effect, and it sounds strong, but it's actually kind of a hollow thing, it can be symbolically very, very damaging, as opposed to very, very constructive. One, because the Chinese can come back and say, look, we've revalued our currency by 25% in the past 5 years, partly because of U.S. pressure, admittedly. And they can also say, look, this is a very public shaming statement that is highly deleterious to ongoing constructive relationships between two countries that are admittedly competitive. Right. And so, in many ways, this is a good campaign statement, but it's the opposite of real strength as a chief executive.
But Joel, both Governor Romney and the president have critics have said they've tried to score points, if you will, with bringing up China, appearing tough on China. In fact, according to the Chinese state-run news agency, this was one of the headlines. The presidential campaign reflects an alarming scenario in which China bashing has become a ritual. It was Thursday, I believe, we did this segment, China versus Ohio, because so many people associate the problems with the American workforce, particularly manufacturing, China. But can you agree that the president has also been equal in a tough talk, if you will, regarding China, and maybe not in realistic terms on how to deal with that?
Well, anyone who would argue that the president hasn't been tough on China certainly isn't watching what the Pentagon is doing in terms of deploying naval assets to the Asian Pacific, talking about a pivot towards Asia. And the kind of rhetoric about labeling countries, however, as enemies, this trends into other areas like Russia, where Mitt Romney called Russia our greatest geostrategic political foe, much to the chagrin of people like Colin Powell, who said, come on, Mitt, this is the kind of